Sterling Whitmore stepped off the sleek black sedan that had ferried him from the private airstrip to the gates of Ocean Haven. The town unfolded before him like a postcard, all pristine boardwalks, pastel-colored cottages, and shimmering views of the Pacific Ocean. The scent of salt air mingled with the faint aroma of jasmine from the lush gardens surrounding the exclusive resort, the kind of place where time seemed to slow to a crawl. Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, his jaw tightening as he surveyed the idyllic surroundings. This wasn't his world. His assistant had called it healing and his doctor had labeled it essential, but to Sterling, it felt like exile. Inside the resort, the opulence was understated but undeniable. Vaulted ceilings framed with reclaimed wood beams, floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto ocean views, and furnishings that whispered of quiet luxury. The concierge spoke with the polished ease of someone accustomed to catering to a wealthy clientele, but Sterling barely heard a word. He nodded through the check-in process, grateful to retreat to his suite. The room was a marvel of modern design, but Sterling only noticed the oversized windows that framed the horizon. He stood there for a moment, his reflection a ghost in the glass. The reminder of his doctor's stern words, hypertension, stress management, the terrifying phrase, ticking time bomb, replayed in his mind. On the second day, restlessness propelled him out of the resort and into the town. The cobblestone streets were lined with boutique shops, quaint cafes, and galleries that invited passers-by to linger. Sterling walked briskly, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes scanning the surroundings. It was a town built for leisure, and everything about it felt alien. Yet something about the quiet charm of the place was beginning to erode his resistance. It wasn't his usual pace, but it also wasn't entirely unwelcome. His aimless steps brought him to a storefront with a hand-painted sign, Marlowe's Mercantile. The window displayed an array of handcrafted goods, ceramics, delicate blown glass, and a few wooden figurines that spoke of hours of careful carving. Sterling's curiosity tugged at him, and before he could think too much about it, he stepped inside. The cool air carried the faint scent of cedar, and sunlight streamed through the large windows, highlighting the carefully curated shelves. Behind the counter, arranging a display of vases, was Elena Marlowe. Time had softened her features but had done nothing to diminish her presence. Her auburn hair, tied back loosely, caught the light in a way that made it shimmer, and her posture, slightly tense but composed, spoke of someone who was used to being in control of her space. For a moment, she didn't notice him, but when she looked up, her eyes widened. "Sterling," she said, her voice laced with surprise and something else, wariness, perhaps. Her hands stilled, the vase she was holding momentarily forgotten. "Elena," he replied, his tone carefully neutral. His heart beat a little faster, an unexpected reaction to the woman he hadn't seen in over a decade. The last time they'd stood face to face, they'd said goodbye in a way that had felt both inevitable and unfinished. He had been so sure then that his career demanded his undivided attention, and she had deserved someone willing to share his time and his heart. She recovered quickly, setting down the vase and stepping out from behind the counter. "I didn't know you were in town." "Neither did I, until a few days ago," he admitted. "My assistant booked me into the resort. Apparently, my blood pressure needed a vacation more than I did." Her lips twitched in a polite approximation of a smile. "Ocean Haven is good for that. It has a way of forcing you to slow down." He noted her guarded tone, the way her hands fidgeted slightly before she clasped them together. "It seems to be working," he said, though the words felt thin. "I didn't expect to see you here. This shop was my parents' dream. When they passed, I decided to carry it on," she said, her voice softening as she spoke about the place. "It's grown a bit since then." "It suits you," he said sincerely, his gaze sweeping over the room. The warmth of the space mirrored something he had always associated with her, an ease, a quiet depth. "Thank you," she replied, though her eyes flicked to the side, as if looking for an escape route. There was a pause, one that felt full of things unsaid. Sterling shifted slightly, resisting the urge to fill the silence with pleasantries. He had never been good at small talk, but Elena's silence was doing strange things to his thoughts. Memories he hadn't revisited in years surfaced unbidden, late nights talking on a rickety balcony, the curve of her laugh when he'd said something to make her blush, the ache in his chest when they'd parted ways. "How long are you staying?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes cautious. "A couple of weeks, maybe more. It depends on what my doctor says about my progress." He used air quotes, trying to make light of it, but her expression softened slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw concern flicker across her face. "Well, Ocean Haven has a way of growing on people," she said, her words carrying an undertone that he couldn't quite place. "If you're here long enough, you might even enjoy it." "I'll take your word for it," he replied, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe we could have lunch sometime? Catch up?" She hesitated, and in that pause, Sterling felt the weight of the years between them. "Maybe," she said finally, her voice carefully measured. "Let me think about it." He nodded, not wanting to press her. "It was good to see you, Elena." "You too," she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Sterling left the shop, the bell above the door tinkling softly as it closed behind him. He walked slowly back toward the resort, his mind racing. He hadn't expected to see her, let alone feel so much at the sight of her. And yet, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the town in a golden glow, he found himself hoping she might say yes. The marina at Ocean Haven bustled gently in the late morning sun, and after a few days in town, he had grown to appreciate it. Boats swayed lazily at their moorings, the water glinting as if sprinkled with diamonds. Sterling Whitmore wandered through the scene, his hands in his pockets, his polished loafers clicking against the wooden planks of the dock. The salty tang in the air mingled with the faint aroma of fresh pastries from a nearby cafe, but his thoughts were elsewhere, meandering as aimlessly as his steps. He paused near a bench where the view stretched out to the horizon, the rolling waves framed by rugged cliffs. The rhythmic crash of water was calming, yet a restlessness remained. He wasn't used to this pace of life, this quiet that seemed to seep into everything. As he stood, absently gazing at the horizon, the sound of animated chatter caught his attention. Just a few feet away, two teenage girls sat cross-legged on the dock, their sketchbook spread out between them. One had her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear, while the other wore her dark curls loose, framing a face that was deeply focused on her drawing. Both were immersed in their work, surrounded by pencils, erasers, and rulers, the kind of tools Sterling recognized immediately. His curiosity drew him closer, and he saw the sketches. Crisp, clean lines formed the beginnings of a suspension bridge, and beside it, an intricate truss design. The details were impressive, precisely measured angles, careful shading to add depth and dimension. Sterling stopped a respectful distance away, his gaze lingering on the drawings. The girls didn't notice him at first, engrossed in their conversation. "That cable system looks weak," the auburn-haired girl said, pointing at her companion's sketch with the eraser of her pencil. "It's not weak," the other protested, tilting her head as she evaluated her work. "I just haven't added the reinforcements yet. You'll see, Blythe, it'll be stronger than yours when I'm done." "Oh, sure," Blythe replied with a teasing grin. "Because you're famous for finishing things, Tessa." Sterling couldn't help but chuckle, and the sound made them both look up sharply. Their expressions shifted from surprise to mild curiosity as they noticed the tall man in the tailored navy blazer standing nearby. His features softened into a smile. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, gesturing toward their sketches. "I couldn't help but admire your work. Those are some impressive designs." The girls exchanged a quick look before Blythe answered. "Thanks. We're just messing around, really. It's not serious." Tessa nudged her friend with a playful glare. "Speak for yourself." "Mine's serious." Sterling stepped closer, crouching slightly to get a better look at the papers spread across the dock. The angles were precise, the perspective clean. There was an enthusiasm in the lines, a kind of creative energy that reminded him of his younger self, bent over a drafting table late into the night. "They're good," he said sincerely. "You've got an eye for structure and balance. Have you thought about studying architecture or engineering?" Blythe shrugged, but Tessa lit up. "I want to. Well, maybe. I'm not sure yet. I like designing stuff, but I don't know if I'm good enough." "You're better than good," Blythe chimed in, nudging her companion's shoulder with her own. "She's just too modest to admit it." Sterling pointed at Tessa's bridge sketch. "This design here, it's ambitious, but your support columns could use a little more reinforcement at the base. See how the load might be uneven?" Tessa leaned forward, studying her own work, her brow furrowing. "Oh, I see it now. That's why it looked a little off. Thanks, mister." "Sterling," he offered with a slight smile. "Sterling Whitmore." "Nice to meet you," Tessa said, glancing back at her sketch. "Are you, like, an engineer or something?" Sterling chuckled lightly. "Something like that." Blythe tilted her head, her sharp green eyes narrowing slightly as she regarded him. "You seem like the kind of guy who knows a lot about this stuff." "I've been in the field a while," Sterling admitted, standing upright again. "If you ever need pointers, feel free to ask." The girls beamed at the compliment, and Sterling found himself charmed by their enthusiasm. It was refreshing, the kind of unfiltered energy he hadn't been around in years. As they chatted briefly about bridge designs and favorite materials, a feeling he couldn't quite place began to take root. There was something about them, something in the way Blythe twirled her pencil as she thought, or the earnest determination in Tessa's voice when she defended her designs. It wasn't just their skill or their shared passion for design. It was a familiarity he couldn't put into words, as though he'd stumbled upon a detail in a blueprint that didn't quite fit but couldn't be ignored. "Well," he said finally, taking a step back. "I should let you get back to it. Keep up the good work." "Thanks, Sterling," Tessa said brightly, giving him a wave. "Yeah," Blythe added with a small grin. "Thanks for the tips." Sterling nodded and turned, his steps slow as he resumed his walk along the marina. He glanced over his shoulder once, watching as the girls bent over their sketchbooks again, their conversation resuming with the same lively energy. Something about the interaction lingered in his mind, a thread of recognition he couldn't quite unravel. The rest of the day passed in the quiet luxury of Ocean Haven, but Sterling's thoughts remained tethered to the encounter. He replayed the details, their faces, their laughter, the confident strokes of their pencils. It wasn't unusual to see young people interested in design, but there was something unique about them, a quality he couldn't shake. That night, as he sat by the large window of his suite, watching the waves roll in under the moonlight, the sense of familiarity returned. He dismissed it as coincidence, a trick of memory conjured by the softness of the evening. Still, the feeling stayed with him, like a faint sketch waiting to be completed. Sterling's thoughts had been tangled since the marina. He replayed every moment, Blythe's sharp wit, Tessa's earnest curiosity, their uncanny ease in each other's company. The sketches had impressed him, yes, but it was more than that. It was a gnawing sense of familiarity, a whisper in the back of his mind that refused to be silenced. And then there was Elena. Seeing her again after so many years had stirred feelings he'd buried under layers of concrete ambition. He hadn't stopped thinking about her either. Unable to quiet the turmoil inside, he found himself walking the cobblestone streets of Ocean Haven early the next afternoon. His aimless stroll led him toward Marlowe's Mercantile, though he'd told himself he was just exploring. As the sign for Elena's shop came into view, he slowed. He wasn't sure what he would say if they spoke again, but his feet carried him closer anyway, drawn by something he couldn't name. From across the street, the shop's window framed a scene of cheerful disarray. Elena was rearranging a display near the counter, a look of concentration softening her features. The door jingled, and his attention shifted to two figures entering the shop. Blythe and Tessa stepped inside, their laughter spilling out onto the street like music. They were carrying paper bags, probably from one of the nearby cafes, and chatting animatedly, their words muffled by the glass but their joy unmistakable. Sterling froze mid-step, his pulse quickening. His gaze darted from the girls to the window's faint reflection of himself. It wasn't just their lively energy or their confident posture. It was their faces, the angles of their jawlines, the shape of their eyes, even the way Tessa gestured with her hands as she spoke. He had seen those gestures before, long ago, in old photos of himself. His breath caught. It was impossible, wasn't it? And yet, the resemblance was undeniable. Memories of late nights and long conversations with Elena rushed back, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the image before him. His heart thudded in his chest as realization dawned. Blythe and Tessa weren't just any teenage girls. They weren't just talented, witty strangers he'd met at the marina. They were his. Emotion swept over him, sharp and disorienting. He felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, his mind racing with questions that seemed too large to grasp. His expression, usually controlled and composed, betrayed the storm inside him. Inside the shop, Elena looked up, her hands stilling on the vase she was holding. She saw him immediately, standing rigid on the other side of the street, his eyes locked on the scene inside. She followed his gaze, her own expression shifting in an instant. Understanding flashed across her face, followed by a flicker of something that looked like fear. She glanced quickly toward the girls, who were oblivious to the tension, then back at Sterling. Their eyes met through the glass, and Elena's lips parted slightly, as if she might call out to him. But no words came. Instead, she raised one hand, palm out, in a gesture that clearly meant stop. Her other hand moved quickly, signaling him to leave and making a gesture imitating a phone to her ears. Her movements were precise but urgent, and her expression left no room for argument. Sterling understood immediately. She wanted to protect them from whatever unraveling realization had just struck him. He nodded almost imperceptibly, though his legs felt like lead as he turned to walk away. His steps were slow and heavy, his mind a swirling chaos of emotion and memory. As he rounded the corner, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. Through the shop window, he saw Elena speaking to Blythe and Tessa, her face calm but her posture tense. The girls were laughing again, entirely unaware of the undercurrent in the air. Sterling wandered the streets for hours, the sights and sounds of Ocean Haven blurring around him. The beach was quiet as twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and orange. Waves lapped gently at the shore, the soft rhythm broken only by the occasional cry of seagulls. Elena stood at the edge of the dunes, her arms crossed tightly against the cooling breeze. She had suggested the spot. It was tucked away, far from the lively chatter of the town and the curious eyes of Ocean Haven's residents. She needed privacy for this conversation, though every part of her wished it wasn't happening. Sterling's figure emerged from the path that wound down to the sand, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. He moved deliberately, his steps slowing as he neared her, his face unreadable in the shifting shadows. Elena's pulse quickened, though she kept her posture calm. When he stopped a few feet away, she managed a tight smile that felt more like an attempt at courage than a greeting. "I want to know what is going on," he said simply, his voice low and steady. "I am sure you do," Elena replied, her tone carefully measured. She turned, gesturing toward a driftwood log that rested on the sand. "Shall we sit?" Sterling hesitated for a moment, then nodded, settling onto the weathered wood. Elena joined him, leaving a space between them, though the weight of their shared silence made the distance feel irrelevant. For a moment, neither spoke, the sound of the waves filling the gap as they both tried to find their footing. "I assume you will tell me you had a good reason to keep this from me," Sterling said, breaking the stillness. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, but his hands, clasped tightly in his lap, betrayed his tension. Elena exhaled slowly, her breath a visible mist in the cooling air. How about I answer your questions and you judge my reasons? Sterling turned his head to look at her then, his eyes searching her face. Elena, those girls. Blythe and Tessa. They're mine, aren't they? The question landed between them like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples through the moment. Elena didn't look away, though her throat tightened. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind a dozen times since seeing him on the street, yet the reality of it felt far messier. Yes, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. They're your daughters. Sterling's breath hitched, and he turned fully toward her, his expression a mixture of disbelief, anger, and something deeper, an ache that seemed to cut straight through him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his words heavy with both accusation and hurt. Elena tightened her grip on her crossed arms, her nails digging into the sleeves of her sweater. Because you had just launched your career. You were so focused, so determined to build something extraordinary. And you made sure to express that it was your priority when you broke up with me to focus on your work. I chose to respect that. You didn't think I deserved to know? His voice rose slightly, but he caught himself, lowering his tone. You didn't think I had a right to be part of their lives? It wasn't about you not deserving it, Elena replied, her voice trembling but firm. It was about what was best for them. I didn't know how you'd react. And I couldn't bear the thought of them growing up feeling like they were unwanted. Sterling ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of frustration and regret. You assumed I wouldn't want them? I didn't know, she said honestly. We'd gone our separate ways. You had your world, and I had mine. Elena, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. If I'd known. You say that now, she interrupted, meeting his gaze. But back then, you were adamant the only thing that mattered to you was work. The girls were my focus, and I couldn't disrupt their lives by chasing something uncertain. He sat back slightly, the enormity of what she was saying settling over him like a weight. Blythe and Tessa weren't just passing acquaintances, weren't just reflections of himself he thought he'd imagined. They were his children, a reality he had missed entirely. The guilt was sharp, like a hook catching at his chest. He thought of every milestone he hadn't been there for, their first steps, first words, birthdays, scraped knees, late-night bedtime stories. It was a life he hadn't even known he'd wanted until now. Do they know? He asked finally. Elena shook her head. No. As far as they're concerned, I'm their only parent. I've never talked about their father. The words stung, but Sterling understood. I want to know them, he said, his voice low but steady. I don't know what that looks like or how we get there, but I want to try. Please. Elena looked at him, her eyes searching his face. There was sincerity there, a rawness she hadn't seen in him before. It was as if the polished edges of the man she'd known had softened, replaced by someone willing to confront his own mistakes. It's not that simple, she said carefully. They've built their lives around the world I've created for them. Dropping this on them suddenly, it could turn everything upside down. I'm not asking for miracles, Sterling replied. I'll take whatever steps you think are right. But I need a chance, Elena. I need to be part of their lives, even if it's just in small ways at first. Sterling leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. I want to be part of their lives, Elena. I know I've missed so much, but I'm here now. Let me know them. Elena met his gaze, her expression softening for a moment before hardening again. It's not that simple, she said firmly. You can't just show up and expect everything to fall into place. I'm not going to turn their worlds upside down for someone who's here for 2 weeks and then gone, back to their life of skyscrapers and deadlines. His jaw tightened, the sting of her words undeniable. I have a right to know them, he said, his voice low but resolute. I know you do, Elena replied, her tone quieter but no less firm. But if you want them now, you have to think of them first. This isn't about what you've missed or what you think you're owed. It's about what's best for Blythe and Tessa. If you want to be part of their lives, you have to start thinking about what's going to happen to their world when you show up in it. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for the questions, the emotions, the disruption? Because if you're not, then don't start something you can't finish. Her words landed hard, forcing him to pause. He stared out at the ocean, the waves moving steadily in the fading light. She was right. He couldn't just rush in, no matter how much he wanted to. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking. "You're asking me to predict the future," he said, his tone steady but edged with frustration. "And I can't. Of course, this is a shock. Of course, I don't have all the answers right now. But I know one thing, seeing them changed something in me. I can't move on and pretend they don't exist. I lost part of my past when I didn't know they were mine. I won't be the reason they lose part of their history." Elena folded her arms, watching him carefully, but she didn't interrupt. "They're not little kids," Sterling continued. "They're teenagers. They have opinions, voices, and they deserve to be heard. If they decide they don't want a relationship with me, I'll respect that. But they deserve to have their say. This isn't just about you or me anymore." Her lips parted slightly, her expression betraying her surprise. She had expected resistance, defensiveness, even anger. But this level of thoughtfulness and maturity, wasn't what she had anticipated. Sterling, the man she had known years ago, was impulsive, driven by his own ambitions. Yet here he was, thinking about her daughters and the potential impact on their lives. "So?" he asked, his voice softening as he leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Can we start?" Slowly. At their pace. She hesitated, the weight of the decision visible on her face. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "We can take things very slowly. But you'd better be ready for a storm. Because this isn't going to be easy for any of us." "I wouldn't expect it to be," he replied, a hint of determination in his tone. "But I'm ready." The cafe Elena had chosen was tucked away near the marina, a cozy spot with bright umbrellas and tables overlooking the water. The smell of freshly baked pastries mixed with the saltiness of the ocean air, creating an atmosphere that felt both relaxed and vibrant. Elena sat at a table near the edge of the deck, her fingers wrapped around a glass of iced tea. She glanced toward the entrance, her stomach twisting slightly as she spotted Sterling walking in. "Sterling, over here," she called out, keeping her tone light. He approached the table, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice steady but warm. Elena stood briefly, gesturing to the girls. "Blythe, Tessa, this is Sterling Whitmore. He's an old friend visiting Ocean Haven for a bit. Sterling, these are my daughters." Blythe glanced up first, her sharp green eyes assessing him with curiosity. Tessa followed, her expression more open but equally intrigued. Both smiled in recognition from meeting him a few days earlier. "Oh, hey," Tessa said, breaking into a smile. "We met you at the marina, right? You gave us tips on our sketches." Sterling returned her smile, nodding. "That's right. You two were working on some great designs. It's good to see you again." Blythe leaned back slightly in her chair, giving him a curious once-over. "So, you're the old friend Mom was talking about?" Her tone carried an edge of playful skepticism, and she glanced at Elena with a raised brow. Elena flushed slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, Sterling and I go back a long way," she said quickly, her tone light. "He's visiting Ocean Haven for a little while." The girls exchanged a quick glance, and Tessa stifled a giggle. Sterling pulled out a chair and sat down, maintaining a calm expression despite the subtle tension. Tessa leaned forward, her curls bouncing slightly. So you are just visiting? Just visiting, Sterling said, grateful for her friendliness. I needed a change of pace, and your town came highly recommended. Good choice, Tessa said with a grin. It's small, but it's got everything. Especially if you like the water. And good food, Blythe added, gesturing to the menu. This cafe has the best waffles. Sterling chuckled softly, glancing down at the menu. Noted. I'll have to give them a try. Elena watched the exchange, relieved at how easily it unfolded. She knew her daughters well enough to recognize Blythe's guardedness and Tessa's natural charm, and she could already tell that Sterling was navigating them both with care. When the waiter came to take their orders, Sterling deferred to the girls. Tessa enthusiastically recommended a sandwich she loved, and Blythe, after a moment's thought, suggested a seasonal lemonade that she claimed was the perfect balance of sweet and tart. Sterling ordered both, earning a small smile from Tessa. So, Blythe said once the waiter had left, Mom said you're an engineer? That's right, Sterling said, leaning back slightly. I design bridges mostly. Both girls perked up at that, their interest immediate and unmistakable. Bridges? Tessa said, her voice rising with excitement. That's so cool. Like, the huge ones in cities and stuff? Exactly, Sterling said, his lips curving into a smile. I've worked on a few big ones, but the smaller, more intricate ones can be just as rewarding. Blythe tilted her head, her curiosity piqued despite her earlier reserve. How do you even start designing something like that? It seems impossible. Sterling leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. It starts with understanding the landscape. The environment dictates a lot, what materials will work, how much weight the structure needs to hold, things like that. From there, it's about balancing function with aesthetics. A bridge has to be strong and reliable, but it should also fit the space it's in. That's so cool, Tessa said, her eyes wide. I always think about how stuff like that gets built when I see it. Like, someone had to come up with the idea before it could even exist. Sterling nodded, impressed by her enthusiasm. Have you been working on more designs since the marina? That question brightened Tessa's face immediately. Yes. I've been sketching an arched bridge inspired by the one you told us about, with the decorative supports. And I've been refining the suspension model, Blythe added, though her tone was more reserved. That's great, Sterling said, leaning forward slightly. I'd love to see what you've come up with. Your ideas had a lot of potential. Blythe's expression softened, and she gave a small shrug. We don't usually show people until they're finished. Fair enough, Sterling replied, his smile warm. Sterling chuckled again, watching as Blythe opened the sketchbook and laid it on the table. The pages were filled with intricate drawings, bridges, buildings, even a few whimsical designs that looked like something out of a fantasy novel. Sterling traced one sketch with his gaze, impressed by the thoughtfulness of the lines. These are incredible, he said, his tone sincere. You've got a natural sense of structure and flow. Do you ever think about studying design or engineering? Tessa shrugged, her cheeks flushing slightly. Maybe. I mean, I like it, but I'm not sure if I'm good enough. Trust me, Sterling said, meeting her eyes. You're good. It takes more than skill, though. It takes passion, and you clearly have that. Blythe glanced at him, her lips twitching into a small smile. What about you? Did you always know you wanted to design bridges? Sterling hesitated for a moment, surprised by the question. Not always, he admitted. When I was younger, I wanted to be a pilot. But then, one summer, I helped my grandfather repair a small bridge on his farm. Something about it just clicked. I loved the problem solving, the precision, and how it felt to create something that could help people. That's awesome, Tessa said, leaning her chin on her hand. I didn't think about how bridges help people, but they do. They connect everything. Exactly, Sterling said, his smile deepening. And sometimes, the most rewarding part isn't the big, flashy projects. It's the ones that quietly make a difference. As they continued talking, the initial tension around the table dissolved completely. The girls were animated, asking questions and sharing their own ideas, while Sterling listened with genuine interest. He offered advice here and there, his tone encouraging but never patronizing. Elena watched quietly, her heart a mix of emotions. Sterling's warmth and attentiveness were impossible to ignore, and the girls were clearly responding to it. When the food arrived, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: favorite places in town, embarrassing childhood stories, and Tessa's comical misadventures with a paddleboard. Sterling found himself laughing more than he had in years, charmed by the easy rhythm of their chatter. The girls kept sneaking quick glances at their mother, trading quiet giggles that made it clear they were silently analyzing the situation. Elena pretended not to notice, though the slight blush in her cheeks betrayed her awareness. Blythe tilted her head, studying him. "So, how do you know our mom?" Elena's head shot up, her cheeks flushed with sudden color. "Blythe." "What?" Blythe said innocently, her lips curving in a mischievous smile. "It's a normal question." Sterling chuckled, easing the tension. "We met a long time ago," he said, his tone casual. "I guess you could say we were good friends who lost touch over the years." Tessa nodded thoughtfully, but Blythe gave him a skeptical look before focusing back on her plate. As the conversation moved forward, Sterling continued to engage with them, asking about their hobbies and plans. He listened with genuine interest, offering thoughtful comments and advice. Slowly, the girls began to warm to him. Blythe's guarded demeanor softened, and Tessa's enthusiasm grew with each shared story. As they finished their meal, Tessa leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "You're pretty cool for an engineer," she said, grinning. "No offense, but I didn't think they'd be this fun." "None taken," Sterling said, chuckling. "I'll take that as a compliment." Blythe rolled her eyes but smiled. "Yeah, you're not bad." Sterling laughed softly. "Thanks, Tessa. And you two are pretty great designers." "I mean it, keep going with those ideas." As they stood to leave, the girls lingered for a moment, whispering to each other as they walked ahead. Their laughter was soft and conspiratorial, and Sterling caught Elena's eye as they followed behind. Elena caught Sterling's gaze then, and for a brief moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. The day had gone better than she could have hoped, and she could see how much the experience had meant to him. Sterling's expression was softer now, his usual composure tinged with something more vulnerable. Tessa waved enthusiastically. "See you around, Sterling." "See you," Blythe added, her tone quieter but no less genuine. Sterling nodded, his heart full in a way he hadn't anticipated. "I hope so." Ocean Haven's breezy days stretched into weeks, and Sterling found himself more entangled in Blythe and Tessa's world than he ever anticipated. Elena had allowed their interactions to grow naturally, and the girls had taken to inviting Sterling along on their outings with a casual enthusiasm that warmed him in ways he hadn't expected. They made a lively trio, Blythe with her sharp wit, Tessa with her boundless curiosity, and Sterling learning to navigate the delicate balance between guiding and listening. One sun-drenched afternoon, they found themselves in a small hobby shop tucked between a gelateria and a boutique bookstore. Tessa had spotted the window display, a wooden model of a vintage ship, and dragged Sterling and Blythe inside with uncontainable excitement. The shop was a treasure trove of puzzles, intricate models, and tiny figurines, all arranged in neat rows. Sterling immediately noticed how the girls' eyes lit up as they explored. Tessa held up a box featuring a sprawling castle made of interlocking pieces. "This is amazing. Look at all the tiny towers." Blythe examined it skeptically. "That looks like it would take forever." "That's the point," Tessa said, rolling her eyes. "It's a challenge." You can't rush art. Sterling chuckled, taking the box from Tessa to study the image. She's right. The fun is in figuring it out. And this one looks like it's got some tricky angles. Tessa grinned triumphantly. See? Sterling gets it. Blythe groaned but couldn't hide her amusement. Fine. But if we're doing this, I'm claiming the cool parts. No one's sticking me with boring pieces. They left the shop with 2 model kits, Tessa's castle and Blythe's choice of a sleek, modern skyscraper. Sterling couldn't resist picking up one for himself, a suspension bridge with delicate cables and intricate support beams. As they walked back to Elena's house, the conversation buzzed with plans for how to divide and conquer the projects. When they arrived, they found Elena in the kitchen. She offered him a warm smile. "You're early," she said. "Thought I'd surprise you," Sterling replied, setting the bag on the counter. The girls trailed in behind him, whispering to each other. Tessa's giggles grew louder, and Blythe had to shush her as they slid into chairs at the table. "What's going on with you two?" Elena asked, turning her attention to her daughters. "Nothing," Blythe said again, though her smirk betrayed her. Tessa clamped a hand over her mouth, clearly holding back laughter. Sterling glanced at Elena, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "It's definitely something," he said lightly. Elena sighed and shook her head. "Teenagers," she muttered under her breath, though her tone carried amusement. They spent the afternoon gathered around the dining table, the pieces of the model spread out between them. Sterling walked the girls through the instructions, showing them how to approach the more complicated sections. Tessa was quick to jump in, her enthusiasm bubbling over as she carefully aligned pieces. Blythe took a more methodical approach, her sharp eyes catching details the others sometimes missed. Elena watched from the kitchen as she prepared drinks, her heart warming at the sight of them. Sterling fit into this dynamic so naturally that it was hard to believe he hadn't always been part of their lives. The project wasn't finished by the end of the day, but they'd made significant progress. Tessa declared it a masterpiece in progress, while Blythe insisted they could improve on a few sections next time. As they cleaned up, the girls' earlier giggles and glances didn't go unnoticed by Sterling. He waited until they stepped out of the room before turning to Elena. "They're incredible," he said quietly. "Smart, creative, full of ideas. You've done an amazing job, Elena." She glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Thank you. But they're incredible because of who they are. I just try to keep up." The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Elena's cozy living room, casting long, golden rays across the hardwood floors. The table in front of the couch was scattered with pieces of their latest model building project, but today, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Sterling sat in one of the armchairs, his hands resting on his knees, his jaw tight with an unspoken tension. Elena stood near the window, her arms crossed as she glanced outside, trying to steady her nerves. Blythe and Tessa sat on the couch, exchanging a look before Blythe spoke up. "Okay, what's going on?" "Yeah," Tessa added, her head tilting as she studied their mom and Sterling. "You guys are being weird. Did something happen?" Elena turned back to them, forcing a small smile. "No, nothing happened. She trailed off, glancing at Sterling for support. "You're totally acting strange," Blythe said, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Then a sly grin crept onto her face. "Wait a minute. Are you two dating or something?" Tessa gasped, clapping her hands together. "Oh my gosh, are you? You can just tell us, we've known for a while now." Elena blinked, caught off guard, but Sterling leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but gentle. "No, it's not that," he said. "But we do have something important to talk to you about." Blythe's grin faded, her brows knitting together. Tessa tilted her head, her earlier excitement giving way to curiosity. "Okay," Blythe said slowly. "What is it?" Elena hesitated, her heart pounding as she glanced at Sterling again. He gave her a small nod, then turned back to the girls. The reason I've been spending time with you both, he began carefully, and the reason your mom and I have been talking so much, is because I'm your father. For a moment, silence filled the room, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Blythe and Tessa stared at him, their expressions blank with confusion. What? Blythe said, her voice flat. Tessa blinked rapidly, shaking her head. Wait, what did you just say? Sterling's gaze softened as he tried to clarify. I'm your father. I didn't know about you until recently, but... No, Blythe interrupted, holding up a hand as if to stop him. No, that's not. What? Are you joking? Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. He's not joking, Blythe. It's true. You've got to be kidding me, Blythe said, her voice rising. She turned to Tessa, whose face was frozen in wide-eyed disbelief. This is some kind of joke, right? It has to be. Tessa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her gaze darted between Elena and Sterling, trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. When neither adult spoke, Blythe's confusion morphed into anger. You're serious? She demanded. You're seriously saying he's our dad? And you just, what? Decided to spring this on us now? Elena took a step closer, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. We wanted to tell you in the right way, but... The right way? Blythe snapped, cutting her off. You mean pretending he's just some guy who's your friend? Letting him hang around us like it's no big deal? That's the right way? Tessa's voice, smaller but just as sharp, broke in. How could you do that, Mom? How could you not tell us from the beginning? This whole time, we've been hanging out with him, thinking he's just some random guy. But he's our dad? Sterling held up his hands, his voice steady but pleading. We weren't trying to deceive you. We thought it would be better for you to get to know me without knowing the truth. Blythe shouted, standing up. Her face was flushed with anger, her green eyes blazing. You didn't think we deserved to know the truth? That maybe we'd want to have a say in this whole charade? Tessa stood up too, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You were pretending. Both of you. Like we're just some project you can manage. Girls, please, Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. We were trying to give you a chance to know Sterling before. No. Blythe snapped. You don't get to decide how we get to know him. You lied to us, both of you. And if he's our dad, don't you think we should have had a choice in whether we even wanted to meet him? Sterling's expression tightened, the weight of their anger crashing over him. You're right, he said quietly. You deserve to have a choice. That's why. Too late for that, Blythe spat, her voice shaking. You already decided everything for us. You didn't care about what we wanted. Tessa's voice cracked as she looked at her mother, her eyes glistening. Why, Mom? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you think we deserved to know? Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Tessa held up a hand, shaking her head furiously. Forget it, she said. I don't want to hear it. Blythe grabbed Tessa's arm, pulling her toward the hallway. Come on, she muttered, her voice sharp. Let's get out of here. As they moved toward the hallway, Blythe whirled around, her face red with fury, her voice cracking as she screamed at Sterling, We never want to see you again. Tessa followed, her tear-filled eyes burning with betrayal as she looked at Elena and shouted, We hate you, Mom. The two stormed off, their footsteps heavy as they climbed the stairs. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the house, followed by muffled sobs. From the living room, Elena stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Sterling sat back in the armchair, his head bowed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They hate me, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "They're hurt," Sterling said softly, his own voice heavy with regret. "And they have every right to be. We really messed this up." Elena sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I thought we were doing the right thing," she said, her words muffled. "But we were obviously wrong." Sterling didn't respond right away. He simply stared at the scattered model pieces on the table, a hollow ache settling in his chest. "We'll give them time," he said eventually, though the certainty in his voice had faded. "Time," Elena echoed, her voice laced with doubt. But in that moment, time felt like both their only ally and their greatest enemy. The next morning, the tension in the house was palpable. Blythe and Tessa barely looked at their mother as they ate breakfast in stony silence. Elena let them take the lead, giving them space to process. Every now and then, she glanced at them, her heart heavy with the weight of the previous evening's confrontation. Blythe was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp and biting. "Why didn't you tell us?" Elena set down her coffee mug and met her daughter's piercing gaze. "I should have," she admitted quietly. "You're right to be upset. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was wrong." Tessa folded her arms, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Protecting us from what? From knowing we had a dad? Or from him not wanting us?" Elena flinched at the question but held steady. "From the possibility of being hurt," she said softly. "When Sterling and when we went our separate ways, he didn't know about you. I didn't tell him because I thought his life, his career, was more important to him. I was scared he wouldn't want to be a part of your lives." "Did he say that?" Blythe asked, her tone accusatory. "No," Elena admitted, her voice trembling. "I assumed it. I made that choice, and I thought I was doing what was best for you. But I realize now that it wasn't my decision to make alone. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." Tessa's anger softened slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "So, he didn't know about us?" Elena nodded. "He didn't. When he came to Ocean Haven, he had no idea you existed. But when he found out, he wanted to know you. He still does." Blythe leaned back in her chair, her green eyes narrowing as she processed her mother's words. "And you thought it was a good idea to just throw him into our lives without telling us? Like some kind of test?" "It wasn't a test," Elena said gently. "It was a chance. A chance for you to see who he is without the weight of expectations. But I see now how it must have felt to you, and I'm sorry for that too." There was a long pause as the girls exchanged glances. The anger that had burned so brightly the night before had dulled into something quieter, less certain. Curiosity had begun to creep in, though neither of them would admit it aloud. "So, what happens now?" Tessa asked hesitantly. Elena hesitated, then offered a small, hopeful smile. "That's up to you. Sterling wants to talk to you, to answer your questions and explain himself. He wants to start over, but only if you're ready." Blythe didn't respond immediately, but her expression softened slightly. Tessa fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, her voice quieter. "What would we even say to him?" "Anything you want," Elena said. "You can ask him anything, or tell him how you feel. He'll listen. He just wants the chance to know you." Later that afternoon, a message arrived from Sterling. It was simple but heartfelt. "I know last night was overwhelming, but I'd like the chance to start over. If you're willing, please join me for dinner tonight at the hotel. I'd love to talk and answer your questions." The girls read the message together, their expressions guarded but curious. After a quiet moment, Blythe shrugged. "We might as well go," she said, trying to sound indifferent. "It doesn't mean anything." "Yeah," Tessa agreed softly. "Just to see what he says." That evening, they arrived at the resort, where Sterling had arranged a private table on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The setting sun bathed the scene in warm hues, the sound of waves creating a soothing backdrop. Sterling stood as they approached, his expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. The girls sat down, and for a moment, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Then Blythe broke the silence. "So, you wanted to start over?" Sterling nodded. "Yes. I know last night was a lot, and I don't blame you for being upset. I want to give you the chance to know me, the real me. No surprises this time." The conversation began tentatively, with the girls asking questions that grew increasingly pointed. Why hadn't he stayed in touch with their mom? What was so important that he hadn't come back? Did he even want kids? Sterling answered each one honestly, his voice steady but vulnerable. He admitted his past mistakes and explained his regrets. Slowly, the tension eased, and the girls' guarded curiosity deepened into something more genuine. Eventually, Blythe asked, "So how long are you staying in Ocean Haven? You said you were only here for 2 weeks." Sterling hesitated, then looked at Elena before turning back to the girls. "That's something I've been thinking about a lot," he said. "When I came here, I thought this was just a break from my life. But meeting you both has changed everything. I don't want to go back to the way things were." He glanced at Elena again, his gaze soft but steady. "I want to stay," he said. Then he turned to Blythe and Tessa, his expression earnest. "But only if you want me to. Would you like me to be around?" The girls exchanged a look, their expressions softening as they silently processed his words. Finally, Tessa smiled hesitantly, her voice quiet but sincere. "Maybe." Blythe gave him a long, searching look before nodding slightly. "Yeah," she said, her tone almost grudging but with a hint of warmth. "Maybe." Elena watched the exchange, her heart swelling with cautious hope. The girls had been hurt, and there was still a long way to go, but the door was no longer closed. As they finished their meal, the conversation grew lighter, the laughter of teenagers mingling with the evening breeze. The days in Ocean Haven had begun to take on a rhythm Sterling never expected to cherish. Mornings brought the sound of gulls and the soft hum of waves outside his villa, while afternoons were filled with time spent alongside Blythe and Tessa. It was in those moments, helping Tessa adjust the tension on a model bridge's cables or marveling at Blythe's precise sketches, that Sterling felt the shift within himself. He had built a life on blueprints and skyscrapers, but here, with them, the foundation felt stronger, truer. He started to find excuses to linger. What began as a temporary retreat stretched into weeks, and then, one evening, over coffee on the porch of Elena's house, he told her what had been on his mind. "I'm staying," he said simply, the certainty in his voice unmistakable. Elena tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Staying where?" "Ocean Haven?" "Yes," he replied. "It won't be easy scaling back, but I've already spoken to my firm. They're not thrilled, but they'll manage. I'll take fewer projects, work remotely when I can. I want to be here, for them. For us." Her smile softened, and she reached out to place her hand over his. "They'll manage," she said. "And so will we."